Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, we'll be discussing my thoughts on the anime series Shigatsu wa Kimi no Uso, or Your Lie in April, a series that has been recommended to me several times over, especially in reference to being similar. It was described to me in any case as Hibiki Euphonium, which is a series about music, and this was a series that was described to me as being about music, and I actually take minor issue with that. Whereas Hibiki Euphonium was about music, where the music pieces themselves were just as put into the limelight as the character stories unfolding. This series is much more about the characters and the drama, and the music kind of is set by the wayside. While it does deal with classical music, most of the time characters are talking over the pieces that are being played and that kind of thing, and it takes, a second note, basically, no pun intended, to the characters and the story unfolding. So for that reason, I don't really find it to be very similar to Hibiki Euphonium, as well as the fact that this series is much more bittersweet, depressing in places, melodramatic a little bit here and there, whereas Hibiki Euphonium was very much more affirming and warming a series to watch. But this series is not without merit, and that's kind of why I wanted to talk about it in full in this particular video. Basically, the story revolves around a former child prodigy concert pianist, Kosei, who is, he's basically stopped playing piano because of psychological and physical abuses as suffered by his mother's hand, effectively. A former pianist herself, she becomes ill and basically disabled, and decides to try to mold and shape Kosei into being a pianist, taking up where she left off and trying to live vicariously through him. But she's a beast. She's a monster in certain, ways that she tries to get him to do these things. As a child, he was known as the human metronome because of how down to the very note he could play all of these classical pieces without skipping a beat, but it was because he was forced to study the music over and over again, repeatedly getting beatings when he wouldn't, like 8 hours a day or whatever it is. He'd have to wear long-sleeved clothes, shirts and things like that, and long pants to cover up the bruises that he suffered from his mother. And so he's very much suffering a psychological block because of this, where when he plays, he becomes deaf, a certain amount of time the way through the pieces he's playing to his own playing. He can't hear it anymore, and he feels very much psychologically like this is his punishment for something that is revealed a little ways down, through the course of the series, where he'd finally had enough of his mother, and he wished her dead, and this was like the last thing he ever said to her before she actually died. So he feels like, because he wanted to cast her away, because he wanted to have nothing to do with what his mother wanted for him anymore, this is his punishment now, and he'd have to give up being a pianist. Well, enter his childhood friend Tsubaki, who is a very sort of kawaii, best chum and everything like that, of a girl, wanting to introduce this other new girl, Kaori, to their mutual friend and jock, Watari. This is Kosei's best friend, Watari, and that title, Your Lie in April, I wondered if there was going to be an answer to what the lie was, if there was an actual lie that was told. And without wanting to give too much away, it all has to do with the meeting of these four characters, two in specific, nature to it. Two people are trying to become introduced, if you will, and it's not the two that you're told from right off the bat. And the story really takes off with the introduction of Kaori, because she is a concert violinist. She was moved by music going all the way back to when she saw Kosei perform as a child, and she will not be the first character through the course of the series that you'll be introduced to that was affected by his playing, his masterful playing. there are two other concert pianists and competitors that we meet later on in the series that both, in one way or another, were shaped and molded by the music they heard Kosei performing before his mother died and before he had his breakdown. And both of them sought to become pianists in their own right, musicians in their own right, because of the effect his music playing had on them. It's very much the same with Kaori, although she wanted to be a violinist for another reason. And again, this is, somewhat spoilery. I don't want to ruin it all for you if you haven't seen the series. But her motivations are something that they pepper throughout the course of the series. You're given little by little here and there, and it really comes to fruition by the end. And the problem with Kaori's character is she is a beacon, she is a light. You see she and Kosei performing. She's very much the one who gets him back into the idea of even playing the piano again. And it's a very, very hard uphill battle for him, because he's really dealing with that psychological block. He's almost having a nervous breakdown each time he has to perform on stage. He starts to not play as well, and you're getting right inside his mind, seeing that he feels like he's being consumed by water. He's at the deepest ocean depths and can no longer hear even as he's playing on stage. And so it's a very hard hurdle for him to overcome. And it's something through the help of Kaori, this beautiful character who, she plays the violin so beautifully, and she wants him to be sort of her backup pianist in their first performance, and then she challenges him to go and, enter a competition of his own, and then they make the promise that they will work together again. But unfortunately, Kaori is ill. She's very sick. I don't know, they never really specify what it is that is affecting her, but it's something that leads her to pass out and collapse several times, and she loses the functionality of her legs. She can't control her hands and motor functions. And so it's something very similar, at least in Kosei's mind, to being what his mother went through. And after meeting this beacon of hope that Kaori is, this beauty, this light, this girl that finally brings the color back to Kosei's world and really challenges him to overcome those hurdles, to suddenly have to deal with losing her in the same way as he lost his mother, who, even though she was a monster toward the end, he becomes appreciative of all the love that his mother had for him over the course of the story, through the interventions of not only Kaori but his jock friend Watari and Tsubaki, his childhood chum, who in her own right, there's some focus on her. There begins this love triangle where Kosei and Tsubaki are both very much feeling like they're not good enough. For all intents and purposes, Kaori was supposed to be introduced to Watari, even though she wanted to meet somebody else toward the beginning of the story. And whenever they're together, Kosei feels like, oh, well, I'm not as good as he is. He's a sports guy. He's much cuter and to all the girls and all this stuff. He's a ladies' man. I don't have these qualities. So I'd never be good enough for Kaori to lay her heart out for me. And similarly, Tsubaki, she is on a journey where she's the best of friends with Kosei. And she's very integral into getting the ball rolling to put Kaori on his case and to get him trying to, play piano again and overcome those psychological and abusive obstacles. And she begins to slowly realize why she's doing all this. She cares for him much deeper and in a much more, loving way than she would have ever thought possible, because for the most part, she's just kind of seen him as almost like her little brother and vice versa. But you start to see that she has this burgeoning love and conflict because of that, because she too feels like, well, how would I ever be anything in Kosei's eyes when Kaori's around? And so it gets a little melodramatic, and I do feel like the series is a little bit longer-winded than it needed to be. It probably didn't need to be 22 episodes in length, because it does shift the focus between several other characters as well. But the central figures are always Kosei and Kaori and their relationship, and how that is, sort of tantamount to breaking down with her illness, which she tries to keep hidden, and how he tries to cope with that, basically. This series is definitely emotional. It can be depressive at points. I would definitely say it's bittersweet, and but it only really ever moved me to tears once, and that was during the final episode. The final episode is very much about Kosei's finally overcoming those obstacles and playing concert piano again in front of a crowd, and not only playing, but playing without inhibitions, without obstacles, without problems anymore. He's overcome it all, and he's playing forcibly and beautifully, because it's kind of his goodbye to Kaori, which we don't know what's going to happen until that final episode with her, because she does deign to try to get surgery to fix whatever the illness, is that is affecting her. And this will be the one spoiler I will lay out for the series. If you haven't seen it, you may want to skip ahead a few minutes, or you may want to shut the video off here. But the reason I got actually misty-eyed and cried a little bit in this final episode was because while the first half is dedicated to his playing this mourning song of goodbye, he envisions her on stage with him, playing the violin in almost spirit form, and in answer to what is probably her fate. And then you find out what her fate is, and it turns out she had written a letter to Kosei, which he waits several months. It goes from winter to like spring or something like that, before he actually decides to open and read. And by the end of this letter, she has effectively professed, in going over all of their history together that you witnessed in the show, that it was all about meeting him for her. Not Watari, not the jock. That was her lie, told in April, as the title suggests. And that she loved him from the first moment she ever heard him play, and as she grew to know him, she loved him even more. And with her being gone and making this revelation, it really impacted me. It really hit me. It was really the most profound emotional moment for me through the course of the series, and very bittersweet for that. They kind of leave it off with his going to school, or whatever it is, and meeting up with Tsubaki again, who they've had. At this point, she's kind of loosely revealed that, you're going to have to settle for me because I'm the only one who loves you, or whatever. You're going to have to love me, that kind of thing. She'd been pushed to the edge to reveal it, and so it got a little awkward, their relationship at that point. But you're given the hope that maybe things will still carry on in a positive light, but it's very bittersweet. And that's my overall concern with the series. When people would be like, oh, well, you like Hibiki Euphonium, it's a series about music, well, so is this one, and whatever like that, and they're very different series, and one is about music, one is, it's more about the characters with music as a garnish. The only episode that really pays attention to the music is the final episode, where there's barely any talking over it, there's barely any, covering over it, because it's all about the visuals that are going on, linking in mind what Kosei is experiencing, saying goodbye to Kaori, finally. And it's just a mesmerizing series. It is definitely impactful emotionally. It is something that I would highly recommend. But I'd be, basically warning that you should probably have tissues at the ready. I know there are moments, there are beats that kept me just dumbstruck as I was watching them. When you see how abusive Kosei's mother could be, at one point you see her beating him. You don't usually see her beating him. You just see the after effects and his, mulling over, hiding scars, and not being able to play with his friends and everything like that, because he's got to study the piano. But there is one moment where they have a confrontation. That is where he finally says, I wish you would die already. And it's shocking. And there are a lot of moments that suddenly draw you in, your mouth agape, and you're just watching, and you're just stunned at what you're watching. You know, for happy situations, for sad situations, bittersweet situations, horrendously horrifying situations, and scary aspects. And the show definitely has a little bit of everything. And so I can see why it was so highly recommended. I just think it was speciously recommended because it's definitely not the affirming, warming series that Bicky Euphonium was. And it doesn't place as much emphasis on the music being played. Even though the classical music, at least you can hear some of it. Most of it's talked over through the course of the series. But, yeah. I definitely am glad and feel bettered for having sat through the entirety of Your Lie in April, and I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below. If you've seen the series, if you found it as emotionally impactful as I've noted, or if you thought it could have been shorter, you know, less melodramatic in places, if you thought it was pitch perfectly paced and all that kind of stuff. Love it or hate it, anything goes in the comments below. Otherwise, it'll be pretty much it for me on this. If this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.